As 1984, the Cold War was still at risk of flaring up, and mutually assured destruction hung as a sword of Damocles over the world. But in that year, US President Ronald Reagan assured the people of the USSR, "It's true that our governments have had serious differences, but our sons and daughters have never fought each other in war, and if we Americans have our way, they never will." The problem is, they actually already had. Decades before the beginning of the Cold War, the relationship between the US and the Soviet government had actually become heated. President Reagan had forgot to mention, or had simply forgotten, that American and Soviet troops had already engaged in active combat on several occasions, from August 1918 to April 1920. This is the story of the almost forgotten American invasion of Soviet Russia. The American...
What? Hold on. What? America fucking invaded Russia? Spice. Clickbait. This is clickbait.
expedition to
Even Dashi agrees.
Russia stemmed from the complex and confusing events of the last months of World War I, which we'll really try to oversimplify here. First, let's go back to 1917. That's when the former Russian Empire was rocked by not one, but two revolutions. The first one, in February, toppled the Tsarist regime, installing a provisional government headed by Alexander Kerensky. The new prime minister committed to continuing the fight of the Great War alongside its Entente allies and against the German Austro-Hungarian.
Oh,
Welcome back.
thank you.
I have a cheeky video for us to watch while
where?
we're noshing. Wait, did you get tea or did you get food?
I got tea.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. Have you eaten?
No, it's all right. Yeah, I've eaten, definitely.
Okay.
Let's
So,
see.
you know War for Graphics?
Yes.
and Ottoman Empire.
So, one of their videos, those has been released like a year ago, but very randomly, the forgotten invasion, the forgotten US invasion of Russia. Apparently, the claim
This must have been...
is that the US has invaded Russia before.
This must have been somewhere in the Bering Strait, I imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my guess.
Yeah.
Like over there somewhere.
And it's probably disputes over those two little islands.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's see.
And so, for people who don't know, let's see what we can.
Okay. Yeah, it's the Big Diamante and Little Diamante or something like
Yeah, where are they? They're
Yeah, right there in the
over
strait.
Here.
Yeah,
they're
see those
these
two there? Yeah.
little fucking things. These two.
Scroll down more, just want to see what the...
What the inhabitants are. Nothing.
Diomede, that's it,
Diomede.
Diomede.
Where there is fuck all here, just South Greenland. Which apparently
A little... There's maybe a little museum there.
Little
I don't know who the
museum
fuck's
there.
going there.
And
And there's nothing here.
there
And this is...
No. There is a city. Sorry. A town with two roads.
So this is Alaska, bro. This is basically
It's Alaska, yes.
a small little fishing village.
But
I don't... What
Russia
even...
claims this to be theirs as well.
Yeah, so this is probably where the quote-unquote war happened.
Yeah.
Which probably
Well,
was fought out like 20 people.
To be fair, this is our guess. So let's see.
Well, I
Let's
can't
see.
imagine where else they would have invaded Russia.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can't think of anywhere else either.
Let's see.
But
How right
in
are
October,
we?
the Bolshevik Revolution took place. Lenin's new
At the end of
government
the day-
was opposed to the war, and on the 3rd of March 1918 signed the
Okay.
peace treaty of Brest-Litovsk with the Central Empires. The German Reich was now able to move sizable reinforcements to the Western Front, ready for an offensive which could have knocked Britain and France out of the war. The Western Allies were understandably concerned. In June 1918, their Supreme War Council formulated a plan to intervene in Russia and reopen the Eastern Front. Their plan included other midterm objectives. First, stage landings to protect stockpiles of weapons and other supplies. These stores were located in the ports of Archangel on the White Sea and Vladivostok on the Pacific Ocean, and both were at risk of being seized by the Germans or the newly formed Bolshevik armed forces. The second objective
Vladivostok
was
is
to
the
aid the
Russian East
Czechoslovak.
Coast.
Sorry.
Vladivostok is on the Russian east coast, so it's this area where we're looking here. Vladivostok is, I think, either on this peninsula, furthest to the east.
Vladivostok. Or this.
Scroll up.
Specified.
Oh, that's all the way down in North Korea area. Okay. That's far down.
Yep.
Okay, so that's where they
far.
have... That's literally where Japan... Close to where Japan, I think, is there.
Yeah. Japan's what I do find crazy is that Russia has a fucking border with North
China.
Korea.
Oh, with North Korea, yeah. Listen, Russia is huge. And all this land here was... this whole stretch that you're looking at, all the way down, used to be China. But Russia fought... There's a whole lot going on. There was agreements with the Mao Zedong to keep this... Like, there's a whole lot of history around this region. But it's a very ethnically diverse region. Like, Vladivostok is probably quite Russian, but there's a lot of probably Chinese people and all. It's a very...
It would be like Eastern Russian, almost.
This is like the most eastern of Russia you can get. And it's basically to the port of the Great Sea. This is one of the only useful ports that Russia has right now, outside of the Black Sea. And the Black Sea is basically, well, it's closed off by Turkey right now.
Oh no, they also have the... where is it? This port here. Kaliningrad.
Kaliningrad, yes.
But to be fair, that's
it's
just surrounded
closed
by
off
NATO.
by NATO. So it's not very stable, that section. They can do fuck all in the north, because that's the Arctic Sea. There's just nothing you can do there. That strait is basically just frozen over, like 60% of the year. And so you can't do anything up there. So your only other option, your best option for sea land, is Crimea. And that's why Crimea was so important to Russia. See, look where it is in the Black Sea.
Yeah.
Sevastopol, that whole area. That's like literally all of the problems, the geopolitical issues that you can discern can be like at least 50% of them can be answered by literally looking at a map. And Russia's map is not good, because you could think that, oh, they got all this great land, but like 80% of it is useless. And they don't even have a functional supply chain. This is the thing. They have 4 to 5 different supply chains throughout the whole of Russia. Like, Vladivostok is in no way connected to Moscow. It's not happening. Like, the only way that it, like, historically had connection to Moscow. Like,
I mean, if you just look at the fucking population distribution.
Yeah, it's all the way in west. It's all west. And of course, that
give me
eastern pool there.
On a big picture.
You'll look at all the ports that are important to Russia, and that's where you'll see quite a bit of things.
Like, the entire east of Russia is just unpopulated.
Yeah, the whole northeast. It's useless. It's just ice and tundra. That is literally nothing. And mountains. You can do fuck all here. It's not even boreal. It is arid and it's useless.
So there's a theory for the current war going on that the people that are getting mainly like sent to the front lines are from your more eastern parts of Russia.
Yeah.
And they aren't like ethnically Russian in the sense of like Moscow, Russia, but they are still Russian because they reside within Russia. And they are like they are expendable pawns that Putin is using.
Yeah, because they're not like Moscow, Russia. You know? Like, this is this is why I say, like, there's literally like, if you look at these population spots, there's literally 4 to 5 supply chains individually within this country.
Yeah.
Like, some of these aren't even connected. Like, this little small area near Kazakhstan or Mongolia,
I don't know.
That's another supply chain. And then there's the Vladivostok supply chain.
And then there's that supply chain. And there's the supply chain. And there's
they're like literally 4 different nations within one.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Okay.
Legion. This legion numbers. The second objective was to aid the Czechoslovak Legion. This legion, numbering between 50 and 70,000 troops, consisted of former POWs from the Austro-Hungarian army. After the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, they had been stranded in Russia and wished to return to France to join the Allies against the Central Empire. In their plight, they had forged an uneasy alliance with so-called White Russians, anti-communist forces who had sparked the Russian Civil War. The Supreme War Council appealed for the US to join this new adventure in Russia. But President Woodrow Wilson wasn't very sure about it. He saw the intervention as a disguised means to meddle with Russia's internal affairs, and this contradicted one of his 14 points, which should have guided the world towards an enduring peace. In particular, point 6, which called for Russia to independently determine its own political development and national policy. But he gradually changed his mind. Edgar Sisson, an officer with the US Committee on Public Information stationed in Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, informed Wilson that Lenin and the Bolsheviks had been installed in power by a German plot. US Ambassador to Russia David R. Francis piled on with another report stating, "I've seen evidence that the Soviet government submits to German demands without protest, and I'm almost convinced that Lenin and possibly Trotsky are pliable tools, if not responsive German agents." These reports convinced Wilson that the Russian people were not truly represented by the Bolsheviks, themselves pawns of a hostile power. Wilson became more inclined to join operations in Russia. But
I mean, to be fair, if Russia could have very easily sided with the Germans in World
Well, they could have, yeah. But so to my understanding, Lenin was very flip-floppy on the war, based on his, initially I think he was anti-war because they wanted to pull out of this war entirely and become isolationists and focus on building up Russia. But one of the things I thought that he realized later on, so I can't tell when this is, later on, Lenin pushed more for war because he realized that the more people were suffering, the more that, like, remember we were talking about this the other night when it comes to one of the keys of like forming a communist revolution is to have everything so terrible that people finally want that they'll be inspired to riot to have revolution. Yeah. And that was the idea, to actually keep the war going and force people to suffer more and become more despondent with the government, with the monarchy at the time and all that. So I'm not sure when this was, but it's quite plausible that the flip-flopping could have been very, very plausible because these guys, you never knew where these guys were standing.
So this was mentioned earlier. You missed it. It's 1917.
Yes, yeah. So the war's still happening. I think the war ends in 1918, to my understanding.
Yeah.
This is a later part.
We should know this. End of World War II.
I think it was 1918. No, that's World War II. We're talking about World War
War
I. Yeah.
An idiot. Yeah.
Yeah. 11th of November 1918. That's when the Kaiser officially surrendered. And the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Yes, indeed.
And the larger
and the fall of
Germany.
Empire.
Yeah, that was the end of the Ottoman Empire and what proceeded to our modern day issues in that region.
Actually, World War I has set up a lot of fucking problems.
World War I was the precursor to so much bullshit, dude.
It was precursor to World War II. It's the precursor to what the fuck is going on now.
Yeah, it is. It very much is. What's happening in the Middle East, yeah. Arguably, the fall of the Ottoman Empire was probably one of the worst geo catastrophes for that region, I would say.
Though apparently, this was another video I watched. That's probably worthwhile watching as well. Watching again about Turkey. But apparently, which Turkey is like the mini Ottoman Empire. Like that's like their core.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's where it began. So the
Yeah,
Ottoman
yeah.
Empire
And
was based in
apparently there's
Constantinople.
evidence that shows that the Ottoman Empire knew that it was failing.
Yeah, I'm sure they. I think it's possible. It's very likely that they did.
But yeah, that's a out there claim, without any evidence. So
Yeah,
don't trust it.
but it's plausible.
Don't
But
trust
it's
it.
plausible.
Yeah. It's plausible, but don't trust it.
It's pretty plausible to believe that.
The Russian people were not truly represented by the Bolsheviks themselves, pawns of a hostile power. Wilson became more
Yes.
inclined to join operations in Russia. But he needed the right pretext to justify the intervention, as the Republican opposition and a large part of the public opinion was favourable to American isolationism. The right pretext came from Secretary of State
That sounds
Robert
familiar.
Lansing. In a memo
It
dated
sounds very
23rd of
familiar,
June
yeah.
1918, he informed Wilson that the Czechoslovak Legion was stranded alongside the Trans-Siberian Railway. They were headed toward the port
Just
of Vladivostok
quickly
in
check.
Siberia, where they were hoping to embark
When
toward
did
France.
America enter
So,
the war?
helping
The first one.
I know America was the first one. I know America was constantly supplying Europe, just like they're doing with Ukraine right now,
Yeah.
to a much lesser extent, because it was, not a
yeah.
wild-scale European war happening there right now, just a regional one, thankfully. But when did they officially enter World War I? U.S. officially at April? Late, dude.
1970.
Very late into very late. World War One, I think, only was it was a 4-year war.
So wow, they
Just over
only
4 years.
entered in after 3 years.
Well, remember, dude, World War Two began in 1939 with the invasion of Poland, and America only entered with the bombing of Pearl Harbor on, I think it was December 7th, 1940. Oh yeah, so it was 2 years later. So a little bit sooner.
Yeah, this is 3 years later, and then the war ended a year after that.
A year after that, yeah. See how decisive
Year and a
America's
half.
aid was.
Yeah.
I saw the oversimplified video on it, but I do remember that it was decisive when America entered the war. It was pretty much over when they started sending their troops. Like,
Yeah.
it was at a point where...
a tipping point type thing.
Yeah.
The Legion resumed
And it was
the
a
fight
great time
against
to jump in
Germany.
as well.
That was the just cause that could justify American intervention, or rather, interventions. Wilson, in fact, agreed to send 2 expeditionary forces to Russia, one to Archangel, northern Russia, and one in Vladivostok. We'll cover these 2 missions separately, starting with the troubles of the Archangel force, nicknamed the Polar Bears. The right opportunity for the Allies to land in northern Russia presented itself in July 1918. A Soviet government, autonomous from Moscow, had installed itself in Murmansk on the Barents Sea. On the 6th of July, Murmansk signed an agreement with the Western Allies, inviting them to send an expeditionary force. Lenin was furious. How did they dare invite imperialist British and French boots to their soil?
Yep.
The Murmansk Soviet needed Allied protection, as they were
makes
still
sense.
under attack from the Germans, even after the peace of Brest-Litovsk. The main reply to Lenin was, "It's all very well for you to talk that way, sitting there in Moscow. It's good times when people could still flip off Lenin." The agreements allowed a British expeditionary force to also land in Archangel, some 1,000 kilometers to the southwest on the White Sea coast. The Brits arrived
Yep.
on the 2nd
I
of
suppose
August
it would be easy
1918,
for
led
them.
by General Poole. On the 4th of September, they were joined by the US contingent, the Polar Bears. This force consisted of the 339th Infantry Regiment, a battalion of engineers, and 2 medical companies, numbering 5,000 doughboys, as American servicemen were known back then. The men selected were mainly from Michigan and Wisconsin, as it was believed they could better cope with the harsh conditions of the Arctic. Short hours of daylight and temperatures plummeting to minus 50 degrees as
Why didn't they
early as
just go ask the
November
Canadians
clearly
out, bro?
posed a challenge.
Oh, I suppose they're already at war with them.
It's like, yeah, I've sent people who are used to it.
Yeah, well, they come from, Michigan and Minnesota. It's cold up there, so
it's cold up there. So
they'll be
send them.
fine in Russia. Yeah.
To minus 50 degrees as early as November clearly posed a challenge. And on top of that, the Polar Bears were not there for a wilderness excursion. They were being shot at. You see, when the British under General Poole arrived in Archangel, they soon realized that the weapons depots had already been seized by the Bolsheviks. One of their mission objectives had already failed. Moreover, the British forces supported a new provisional government in Archangel, led by an anti-Bolshevik socialist, Nicholas Tchaikovsky. As a result of the situation, Poole and his men actively fought the Bolsheviks, chasing them to the south. When the polar bears arrived in September, they were embroiled in this dangerous and confusing affair. As a result of negotiations with the Supreme War Council, President Wilson had ceded leadership of his expeditionary force to the British. Hence, General Poole could order the doughboys into joining the battle. As early as the 16th of September, US troops under British command fought against the Bolsheviks at Oboziskaya, suffering the first casualties. More small-scale operations and skirmishes followed in September and October. Then on the 11th of November 1918, the guns on the Western Front fell silent. The armistice had been signed. So, the Great War was over, right? Well,
What do we
maybe
do?
it was
Troops on
for
the
the doughboys in France, but for their compatriots in Russia, bullets were still flying. In fact, on
know what
the
is
very
interesting?
armistice day, some 2000...
The same person who came up playing the game over Warhammer in your thing came up on my screen too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
Yeah.
Small
Anyway,
world.
so yeah.
So interesting. So Armistice Day was not the end of technically. It was the official end of World War One, but there was still fighting.
But there was
happening.
still these random, of course, like this. You remember, like this is World War One. It's still basically, you know, it's still like the old century shit, dude. Like when the French entered the war, they were still fighting like they were in the Napoleonic Wars, bro. It was like nothing like anyone had ever seen. So
information.
it was a
chaos.
Yeah, very slow, and it was a chaotic. Holy shit. Yeah.
1,500 Bolshevik troops attacked US, Canadian, British, and White Russian positions.
Sorry?
Yeah, that's probably the main reason why the war just kept on going on, is because not a lot of communication.
Yeah, and what was the first time the industrial might of nations was brought to the forefront.
Exactly.
But for their compatriots in Russia, bullets were still flying. In fact, on the very armistice day, some 2,500 Bolshevik troops attacked US, Canadian, British, and White Russian positions at the Battle of Tulgas on the Dvina River. The Bears were the first to, bear the brunt of the offensive. Heavily outnumbered, they had to retreat. But 3 days later, on the 14th, the platoon of doughboys under Lieutenant Kadehi attacked the Bolshevik camp by surprise. The fierce raid convinced the Bolsheviks that they had been outnumbered and they retreated across the river. Despite this early victory, the polar bears were restless, and Captain H.S. Martin of the Expeditionary Force thus captured their sentiment as such. They stated that they were drafted to fight Germany, not the Bolsheviks, that they had been sent here to guard supplies and not carry on aggressive warfare, that after the signing of the armistice with Germany, their job was finished, and if the government wanted them to stay on and fight Bolshevism, it should say so and announce some definite policy regarding Russia. But the Americans did not receive such orders, and yet they found themselves in open warfare with the Bolsheviks. On the 19th of January 1919, the Reds launched an offensive north of the Dvina River. Shortly before dawn, their artillery shells fell on the American trenches. After an hour-long barrage, the Bolshevik soldiers fixed bayonets and attacked, clad in their white uniforms. The polar bears opened fire with their machine guns, but wave after wave of attackers kept pushing against their positions. Eventually, the Americans, British, Canadian, and White Russian troops had to retreat northwards. The bears lost 39, and 100 were wounded.
It's fucking insane.
All the while, the home front had been brewing with discontent. On February the 14th, 1919, Republicans in the US Senate voted on a bill to withdraw American troops from Russia. The vote resulted in a tie, which Vice President Marshall resolved by voting against the bill. Morale under the polar bears continued to decline until the incident of March the 30th. On that day, a sergeant ordered 4 of his men to load their sleds and head to the front. The soldiers, exhausted and demoralized, refused to obey, prompting their captain to organize a meeting with his superior, Colonel Stewart. Stewart listened to the men's grievances. According to a lieutenant present at the meeting, the soldiers complained that nobody had given them a clear answer as to why they were still there. They remonstrated that they had no reasons to fight against the Bolsheviks, and yet communist troops were trying to push them back into the White Sea. Eventually, Colonel Stewart convinced them to execute their orders, and no disciplinary action was taken for their insubordination. Despite the swift resolution of the events, consequences escalated out of proportion. A report reached the desk of Secretary of War Newton Baker, according to which a mutiny had occurred in Archangel. This account was further exaggerated by the press. On April the 11th, the Washington Post claimed that 4 men had started the mutiny, but a further 250 had been involved. War headlines throughout the nation piled on, creating a whirlwind of hostile public opinion against the expedition in northern Russia. The Republican senator for California, Hiram Johnson, became the voice of public resentment against U.S. interventionism in Russia, adding pressure on Wilson's administration to consider a withdrawal. Secretary Baker dispatched Brigadier General Richardson to Archangel to assess the situation. Before he could arrive, the doughboys fought their last major battle around the village of Bolshar-Ozerki from the 31st of March to the 2nd of April. The Bolsheviks' advance was halted, but it was only a matter of time before the next offensive. When General Richardson landed on April the 17th, he immediately realized that the polar bears severely lacked in numbers, weapons, supplies, and morale compared to the Bolshevik forces. His recommendation was to withdraw, and fast. But evacuation would not be immediate, of course. Over the following weeks, the polar bears repelled several attacks, the fiercest one taking place on the 1st of May on the Varga River. Gradually, the bears then withdrew from their positions and reassembled at Archangel. Unit by unit, they sailed for France. Their positions would be manned by British and White Russian reinforcements who would be doomed to be overrun by the Bolsheviks. On August the 5th, 1919, the headquarters of the American force in northern Russia were officially closed. The 5,000-strong
August 5th.
polar bear expedition.
That is...
Is that 2 years later?
No.
No, sorry, a year later. Almost a year later.
August 5th, 1919.
1919, bro. That's a year, almost a year later. It's like 10 months after the armistice.
10 months after the armistice. That is wild.
Wild, dude. It's just privately everyone just waging war in Russia, like in the East.
And like... and there was a bill to fucking pull them out. And there was no war. And then the one guy who was a linchpin for it was like, you know what? Keep them fighting. like you know what? We have zero reason to fight. The war's over, but you know what? Keep them fighting.
Wait, so the guys on the ground, did he know that? I thought they didn't even realize.
No. So there was a bill in the US Senate for them to withdraw troops.
Yes.
And the bill did not pass.
Oh, okay, yeah, cool.
And it was 50-50.
Did they get the order? Or did they ever receive the order?
So they received the order by a general was sent to go and assess the situation.
And he looked at what was going on and he was like,
yeah.
Seems like y'all can keep fighting.
No. The general then went to assess the situation. He was like, yeah, no, we're getting the fuck out of here.
Oh, so he wanted to get out. Okay, cool.
But the initial bill to withdraw troops did not pass. That's fucking crazy. Like, it shows how the democracies can be slow to react.
But like this slow is bad, dude.
This is like too slow. It's almost like with the in the Russia-Ukraine war, where you had aid to Ukraine being blocked because Republicans were worrying about their border. Type thing.
That's literally it. Yeah.
Like,
and they weren't even worried about that. They were just fear mongering, because when it came to actually signing a bill into place, they ended up backing off because Trump was like, hey, you know what, let's I want to use this as a campaign thing, we'll sort it out next year, when I'm elected again. Like, it's all just a farce.
It's all a farce. And then you have a poor Ukrainian dude fucking chilling in a trench getting shelled by the Russians, and there are people halfway across the world who can send you aid, but they're bickering over what their borders are, how secure their borders are. It's just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
American force in northern Russia were officially closed. The 5,000-strong polar bear expedition had finally left behind them the frozen hell of Archangel. But they also left behind 553 of their brothers in arms, 163 killed in action, 81 lost to the Spanish flu. There were also 305 wounded and 4 POWs.
Yeah, that was their COVID of the time.
Yeah.
So now it's time to look
Arguably
at the second
just
American
about
expedition
as
to
bad.
Russia, the 1-2 side area. The man selected to lead it was Army Major General William Graves. In August 1918, the Secretary of War, Newton Baker, met with Graves to personally hand him Wilson's orders concerning the mission. The main goals of the mission were to support the Czechoslovak region, to maintain order in Vladivostok, and to ensure that the Trans-Siberian Railway remained in operation. Graves, however, was also instructed not to actively get involved in the Russian Civil War, which made the whole set of directives ambiguous and difficult to interpret. For example, the Trans-Siberian was the main logistical lifeline used by the Czechoslovak Legion and the White Russian forces, right? Well, ensuring that rail link remained operative, the US troops would be actively supporting one side of the Civil War. Secretary Baker must have realized the contradictory nature of the orders as well as the delicate nature of the expedition. In fact, this is how he warned General Graves. Watch your step. You'll be walking on eggs loaded with dynamite. The transport of the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force in Siberia, was swiftly organized. The 27th and 37th Regiments of Infantry, reinforced by 5,000 troops from the 8th Division, were dispatched from their bases in the Philippines. These first units landed in Vladivostok on the 15th of August 1918. They would be later joined on the 2nd of September by a further 1,889 troops sailing off San Francisco. The maximum effective strength of the AEF in Siberia would total 8,831 doughboys, which is a sizable force to be shipped across the Pacific Ocean. But the AEF's strength paled in comparison to the Japanese Expeditionary Corps, numbering about 72,000 troops. I should remind you that in World War I, Japan and the US were allies, although their relationship would be an uneasy one in Siberia. With the 27th and 37th Regiments docked in Vladivostok, the man in charge was Colonel Henry Starr, as General Graves was still in transit. Starr was welcomed by the Japanese commander, General Atani, who immediately warned him that Vladivostok was at imminent risk of Bolshevik invasion. The US troops were needed to defend the city. In reality, the Japanese general had cunningly roped in US troops into joining an offensive, not a defensive campaign, and one of the most confusing ones of World War I at that. To oversimplify, the Ussuri and Amur provinces north of Vladivostok had been partially occupied by bands of Bolshevik partisans led by some 15,000 Austrian and German prisoners of war, now on the Red Russian side. The Czechoslovak Legion, also technically former prisoners of war belonging to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, were on the White Russian side and had been actively fighting this Austro-German Bolshevik alliance. But the Legion had been on the back foot, cornered along the Ussuri River. That's when the Japanese cavalry swept into the region. From the 26th of August to the 12th of September, they successfully pushed back the Austro-Germans and the Bolsheviks. During their advance, the US 27th Infantry Regiment protected their flanks and rear and was eventually ordered to occupy the vital rail node of Khabarovsk. The AAF did not engage in fighting with the Bolsheviks on this occasion, but it may be argued that they did play an active role in the Russian Civil War, contrary to their directives. In the following weeks and months, the AAF got further entangled in the conflict, as it was deployed to protect several segments of the Trans-Siberian, according to the Inter-Allied Railway Agreement. More in detail, 2,150 troops were dispatched to protect the Susha coal mines and an adjacent branch line, which were all part.
Oh, what happened there?
My phone.
Oh, is that your internet?
Of the White Russian.
No, my phone connected to Discord.
Oh, and then
and kicked me off.
Oh, wow, lol. Okay, cool.
As it was deployed to protect several segments of the Trans-Siberian, according to the Inter-Allied Railway Agreement. More in detail, 2,150 troops were dispatched to protect the Susha coal mines and an adjacent branch line, which were all part of the White Russian supply network. 2,250 soldiers protected the length of railways running from Vladivostok to the Ussuri River. Finally, 2,000 doughboys were sent 1,700 miles west, guarding the stretch linking Verkha, Odinsk, and Marsavaya. So, there you have it, an ill-prepared, ill-briefed force that had been scattered over an immensely vast territory, guarding infrastructure which benefited only the white side in the Civil War. So, would the Bolshevik partisans start targeting the AEF?
So the White Russians were the loyalists.
Yeah.
While Graves was
The ones
deploying
that
his
were-
troops along the
Well, not loyalists, but royalists. The ones that were still loyal to the
Royalty.
the Romanovs.
Yeah.
Trans-Siberian, political complications arose in Europe, Russia, and back in the US. In November 1918, a local provisional government in Siberia, supported by the Czechoslovak Legion, was overthrown by Admiral Kolchak, a white Russian officer with authoritarian designs. The coup left many legionnaires disillusioned. Was it worth fighting against the Bolsheviks to support this new, unpopular warlord? In the meantime, the armistice in Europe had been declared, the Great War was over, and most legionnaires wanted to return home. The Legion was out of the picture. In theory, Graves' mission had no reason to continue. And yet, he was pressured by Baker and Wilson to remain and ensure the security of the Siberian Railway. A further undeclared goal was to stem Japanese influence in Siberia. The US and Japan were allies, but Washington did not trust Tokyo's intentions.
What is their
Japan sent more than
interest in
70,000
that at
troops to
all?
Siberia, a sizable force which, if left unchecked, could extend excessive influence over the region and its railways. From January to June 1919, Graves and his troops stuck to their somewhat limited brief of guarding the railways whilst keeping an eye on the Japanese. The latter, alongside Britain, France, and the White Russians, pressured the AEF into joining their fight against Bolshevik partisans who frequently staged raids and sabotaged missions against Kolchak's convoys. The first partisan attacks took place on the 14th of March 1919 and increased throughout April. Finally, in May, Graves issued orders to his men to repel the Bolsheviks and chase them back into the surrounding countryside. The first offensive actions by the AEF took place on May the 21st in the sector of the Sukha coal mines. On May the 23rd, 1919, Bolshevik leader Yakov Tryapitsyn retaliated by threatening to murder every American soldier in the area. Graves would have none of that, and he ordered that all partisans be removed by force from Sucha. Captain Rhodes, leading a 40-man unit, executed the order, chasing Tryapitsyn away from the Sucha sector. The coal mines operated smoothly from then on. Throughout June 1919, the AEF doughboys continued pursuing Bolshevik raiders and saboteurs until it was time for them to suffer a devastating attack. At 4 a.m. on June the 25th, 70 soldiers from the 31st Regiment encamped in the village of Romanovka were ambushed by a Bolshevik force numbering more than 1,000 men. The partisans surrounded the American camp, releasing volleys of rifle fire into the sleeping soldiers' tents. The men of the 31st Regiment faced almost certain slaughter. One Corporal Brudnitsky, although seriously wounded, managed to escape the encirclement and returned with reinforcements. A platoon of machine gunners led by Lieutenant Lorimer rushed to Romanovka and hit the Bolsheviks on their flank, causing them to withdraw. The 31st Regiment endured heavy casualties. Their 70-man detachment suffered 26 dead and 26 wounded, 74% of their initial strength. The attack also inflicted a heavy blow on the men's morale. Among the dead partisans, they recognized a supposedly friendly local who had sold them milk the day before.
That is so bizarre.
In addition to contending with the Bolshevik partisans, the
Wonder if
AEF had
it's-
to guard their backs against the White Russians too, and especially their Cossack units. Under Admiral Kolchak's leadership, they had launched a reign of terror over Siberia, harassing, torturing, and executing their Bolshevik foes, as well as civilians caught in the crossfire. General Graves took note of the brutality, especially the crimes perpetrated by Kolchak's second-in-commands, Generals Kalmykov and Semenov. In his memoir, he wrote, "Their troops, under the protection of Japanese troops, were roaming the country like wild animals, killing and robbing the people. If questions were asked about these brutal murders, the reply was that the people murdered were Bolsheviks, and this explanation, apparently, satisfied the world." These warlords commanded a fleet of 14 armoured trains with names like the Merciless, the Terrible, and the Destroyer. Their convoys shuttled along the Trans-Siberian, terrifying local civilians, harassing Bolshevik guerrillas, and on more than one occasion, even the US troops. On the 1st of October 1919, Kalmakov's men arrested a US captain and a corporal in Iman, just north of Vladivostok, on charges of having no valid passport. Captain Johns escaped, but Corporal Sperling remained in custody. His commanding officer, Major Shamatulsky, descended on Iman with 150 men, demanding that the Cossacks release Sperling. The Cossacks refused, and Japanese troops joined the confrontation. If fighting broke out, they would side against the Americans. Luckily, tensions de-escalated when it was revealed that Corporal Sperling had been moved to General Kalmakov's headquarters and that he was about to be freed. When the unlucky corporal returned to his barracks, his superiors found that he had been flogged by the Russians. This may have been grounds for another confrontation, which was avoided at the last minute when Kalmakov offered an apology. In the following months, Graves feared an attack from the White Russians more so than the Bolshevik incursions, but open battle with Kolchak and friends was not to happen. In January of 1920, the Bolshevik forces started gaining ground in Siberia, and Admiral Kolchak realized defeat was imminent. The bulk of the Czechoslovak Legion had not yet managed to return home, so Kolchak asked for their protection against the Red Army. The Legion, appalled at his war crimes, killed two birds with one stone. They handed him over to the Bolsheviks, negotiating a safe passage home in exchange. The admiral was executed on the 7th of February 1920. In the meantime, the Wilson administration had realized that the anti-Bolshevik cause was a lost one. There wasn't any reason, however muddled, to justify the presence of the AEF in Siberia. The US troops started pulling out, with the last doughboys leaving Vladivostok on the 1st of April 1920. They had left behind 189.
That is almost a year longer than the other guys.
This
is 2 years after
Almost
World War One ended.
Yeah, still continuing. I think the regional politics plays a lot into it. I think this was the last bastion of the loyalists.
Yeah.
And the number one thing was more of like a, we have to get rid of these fucking Bolsheviks. And I think it's weird because the Bolsheviks, I'm not even sure if they were necessarily the more extremist wing. I think they were the moderates. I just gotta remember the Bolsheviks. I think they're a bit
Bolshevik
separate
Revolution.
to the Soviets. I think I might be right. Lenin was the Bolsheviks, and then there were Mensheviks. That's right. So the Mensheviks were the loyalists. So Bolsheviks in Russian means the majority, and Mensheviks means the minority, and that's what it stands for. So the
bulk,
it's weird.
The bulk.
It's weird. It's weird because there was even a point where the Mensheviks was actually the Bolsheviks, and the Bolsheviks were actually the Mensheviks, and they referred to themselves as the Bolsheviks because they considered themselves representing the people or the Bolsheviks, even though in Parliament they were actually the minority, and they referred to the majority of Parliament as the men, and then it actually had an official term. But there's a whole story about that.
During the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks,
led by leftist revolutionary Vladimir, seized power and destroyed traditional Tsarist rule. The Bolsheviks would later become the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So this was before the rise of the Soviet Union.
Before the rise of the Soviet Union, but the USA was fighting against communist, pre-communist.
So my understanding of what's going on here
revolution.
is it's kind of like what they were doing in countries like Venezuela.
It seems like that.
The Contra stuff, the Iran Contra stuff. Like the getting involved militarily with small but more battle hardy. This was a later thing. I don't think it was. I think what happened here in Russia is kind of like the I guess the foundation of that sort of policy.
Starting of that policy, yeah.
Yeah, and it sort of was like we need to get rid of these people before they become a problem in Russia, because we'd rather work with this fucking authoritarian dude who's running around slaughtering people because, we can just call them Bolsheviks. And so I think this might have been the start of something similar, almost like...
it's very interesting, actually. Very interesting. Yeah, let's finish this.
And 353 of their comrades lost to enemy fire, frostbite, and the Spanish flu.
Oh, it's got that Spanish flu thrown in.
This was the conclusion of the US invasion in Russia, one that would be largely forgotten or relegated to the status of footnote in history books, despite the constant efforts of veterans and their descendants to memorialize their expedition. Scholarship on the North Russian and Siberian adventures has debated why Wilson decided to intervene in Russia and whether the missions in Archangel and Siberia were a success or a disaster. According to historians George Kenner and Betty Unterberger, Wilson never really had a full understanding of events unfolding in Russia and did not know that his troops would engage and did engage in combat with the Bolsheviks. The president's final decision to intervene was informed by intelligence.
That has to be a lie.
That has to be a meme, bro.
I don't
Just
know that.
remember,
Why are you sending troops then? Why are you sending troops?
what are they doing there? What do
They're
you think they're doing?
there to like bring law and order. What do you think they're
To
gonna
be honest
do?
with you, I don't think that this strategy or this plan had an end game in mind. I think it was a disaster on the political side.
From the get go. Yeah.
Yeah, it was an absolute fucking catastrophe. I mean, look how the American soldiers are just being manipulated and used by the Japanese and the Russian White Army at the same.
Well, they don't have clear directives.
They have no
As you
directives
said,
because there's no
they
one on
don't have
ground.
any
Yeah.
clear directives.
So they're just like, oh fuck, okay, well we want is the war over? Oh okay, shit, well fuck it. No one's telling us to do anything else, so yeah. What an absolute catastrophe. Yeah, let's finish it all.
Claiming that the Bolsheviks were a pawn of the German Reich and was intended to appease pressure from Western allies. On the other hand, authors William Appleman Williams, George Schlid, and David Fogelsong claim that Wilson followed a clear anti-Bolshevik strategy. And what about the results of the
Yeah,
invasion?
that's exactly what it is.
Appleman Williams, at least the
Doesn't take
Siberian mission
too long
can be
to
considered a partial success,
figure
as
that
the
out.
expeditionary force managed to not get too involved with the Civil War and the most anti-democratic elements of the White Russian side. Moreover, the AEF managed to pull out before the ultimate defeat of the counter-revolutionary forces. However, the widespread consensus
marching
is
at?
that the only mission objective accomplished during the US expedition was the repatriation of the Czechoslovak
Doesn't look like
Legion,
America.
an objective which the Legion achieved through
Oh, wait,
negotiation
no, it could be
with the
Washington.
Bolsheviks
Fuck, I don't
and
know.
regardless of Allied support. Otherwise, the US units dispatched to Russia were too small, ill-supplied, and ill-prepared to achieve their operational goals, themselves founded on unclear and contradictory strategic directives. According to James Carl Nelson, author of The Polar Bear Expedition, The Heroes of America's Forgotten Invasion of Russia, Wilson's decision to send troops to Russia without a clear strategy and end objectives in mind foreshadowed other poorly planned American foreign interventions. In Nelson's words, it didn't really achieve anything. It was ill-conceived. The lessons were there that could have been applied in Vietnam and could have been applied in Iran.
Yeah, Iran-Contra and Vietnam.
Yep, that sounds about right. It was ill-conceived.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Listen, I mean, this is old school American foreign policy. Okay, I think
yeah,
I think
this
they've
is
definitely
World
licked
War
their
One
wounds
stuff.
and.
So like,
Oh well, I mean, this is just the groundwork for what was to come. Like Vietnam happened a whole 50 years later, and it's more or less the same kind of thing,
yeah,
just so much more pronounced. It became a full-scale invasion. I would say this ended. I would say this act of American interventionism had its rise and fall in the 90s, and then it picked up again after 9/11. Obviously, with the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. But after the pullout of Afghanistan, I don't know. I don't think America's ever going to be involved in that kind of interventionism again.
To that level of interventionism.
No. I mean, look what they're doing in Ukraine. Look what they're doing in Israel. It's very much like, hey, we'll send you aid.
We'll send you
Send
aid,
you
but
weapons.
That's the extent of it.
We'll send you-
We're not putting boots on the ground.
It's not happening. Not against Russia. Not against any.
Yeah.
We're not going to have another fucking quagmire. I think in many ways I've kind of learned that.
But the thing is that if you have countries in Europe that is preparing for war with Russia that are part of NATO,
Yeah, we're
like
talking about
just
the
like
whole
look-
of the
look at
Baltic
Poland.
states.
and
Yeah, Poland and the Baltic states. I mean, Lithuania, Estonia, and
yeah, they're
what's the
building
other one?
like a fucking wall or some shit. They're
bro, they're ready.
With the
They know what's coming. They know Russia. It's like that's the thing. All these countries know what Russia's up to, and it doesn't take that much fucking thinking to know what's happening here. It's almost like, hey, bro, this is the last it's almost like that boss in Dark Souls 3, the last demon when it becomes a demon prince, and it finally explodes out into this last crazy thing before it extinguishes itself.
yeah.
This is Russia's death throes. I mean, we can all agree to that. Well, I don't know if we can all agree to that, but I think it's definitely
I don't think
Russia's
Russia will
last
entirely
empire.
collapse.
No, I don't think it'll collapse, but I think what emerges from this is not going to be the Russian Federation.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if Russia's going to split up into something else. but the geopolitical power of it will decline quite a bit, I'd say.
Will wane,
It'll be
for
a
sure.
slow death. It'll be a slow death.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's like
but
with all things. Things generally don't end with a roar, but it ends with a whimper.
yeah, very, very sad whimper.
Yeah.